Hey everybody, good to see you again. It's been a little bit here. As I said, the title of the stream, the rumors of my disappearance have been greatly exaggerated. So we are back at last. The week before, the last week of June, I was hoping to stream, and I ended up waking up like Sunday and just did not feel very well. So that ended up meaning there was no stream that week. And a couple of you actually reached out and wished me well, and told me that you hoped I got better. So thank you very much for that. It's very much appreciated. It was very kind of you. And then of course the following week after that was the 4th of July. So obviously I was indisposed for that. And then shortly thereafter I took a little trip up to Detroit with some friends, and went to the Henry Ford Museum, which is where I got this little number. So I got this. They have these neat little injection molding machines up there that you can put a couple bucks in, and it'll do an injection mold right there in front of you. And after seeing the one of the original Oscar Mayer Wienermobiles, I decided that this was certainly the most appropriate one for me to get. So it was down between this or a bust of Mr. Ford himself and the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile won by a mile. So this is proudly displayed here in my workshop now. So very, very, very nice museum. Certainly worth going to see. Wonderful automobile, aviation, train, Americana, and farm equipment sections we got to go through. Did not get to go through Greenwood Village, so hoping to do that next time we go back. But very, very nice trip. Detroit, very similar to Youngstown in a lot of ways, so it felt pretty much like being at home. Oh yeah, you like that, Sandy? Yeah, I'm not sure what my stand would be. I think my stand would have to be saddle stitch. Would be my my stand if I were a JoJo character. But thank you, it's good compliment. It's one of those days where the hair decided to comply. But I got a couple, well, not a couple things. I have one thing particularly that we're gonna work on today. Let me grab it here. Go back. So here's what we got. This was a commission I received shortly before the 4th. And it's one of my quote-unquote regular made-to-order wallets. The customer chose a red Botero interior and a black Botero exterior with scarlet stitching, 8-slot bifold. That's quite a good color combination. Very, very fetching colors to go together. And I've talked about this a few times in Discord. There seems to be some people seem to have difficulty, and there seem to be a lot of different ways of joining these two pieces together, the interior to the exterior. So I thought I would cover my particular manner of doing it. I've tried a couple different ways. I think I've tried all of them, and I find that this one works the best for me. So I'm gonna go through that today. So a little kind of demonstration on how I like to do this. With leatherworking, as I always say, there are many different ways to achieve the same outcome. So you may do it differently, and if it's working for you, that's great. No need to change it. But if you're struggling with it and you're trying to find a good method of accomplishing this task, hopefully this will be of some benefit to you. I covered this in one of my videos where I did the two blue and peanut alligator wallets together, but it kind of glosses over most of it. It's a pretty short overview of how that works. So I hope to get into a little more detail with that. So as you can see, I've already put together, I have the two assemblies ready to go. I have the interior all done. Interior is all set and ready to go. And the exterior is all set and ready to go. I'm trying to think of any salient points to talk about with this. These, I guess one thing worth talking about is this exterior piece. On all my, and if you notice, you can see the light catching that little bulge there in the center. All of my wallet backs now, regardless of how they're put together, regardless of the material, I do with a floating back. So this wallet back is actually only glued on about the outer ½ inch. You can see that's why it pops up there right in the center. And it prevents it from wrinkling excessively as it folds and opens. So again, just the outer ½ inch is glued around, and everything else, all of this whole center section here, is all floating. And I find that works very well for pretty much all bifold and folding wallet styles there. This is all Botero. It's 0.8mm Botero, skived at the edges. You can see we're pretty thin there. And when we put these together, that's going to be that ends up being just a little bit over about 1/8 of an inch. And I think once we crease it and stitch it together, it'll compress a little bit. It should be just about 1/8 of an inch thick at the edges, which that's pretty much perfect. I don't like to go too much thinner than that, but I also don't like to go much thicker than that either. So this should look quite nice. So I have these trimmed to size already. Everything is all set. And the way I do this, like I said, I've tried just about every different way of doing it that I know of. See if anybody has something else that I haven't tried yet. But the way I've come down to doing it is I punch the holes separately on the two pieces. And I know some people do this and try to do like an opposing X kind of punch on that. Having tried that, I really dislike it. I found it very awkward, and I saw no real benefit to doing it versus any other way. I think this way, kind of, you get the, by punching them separate from one another, you minimize the amount of thickness you're trying to go through, and it lets you get a cleaner exterior, back stitch on this. So I'll show you what I'm talking about there. But there's a couple things to do before we get to doing that. You'll see the bottoms of the corners are still hard corners. We need to trim those. I'm going to use my corner punches here. These are the My Leather Tool corner punches. I think they're for sale on Etsy. I think these cost about 150, 160 bucks when I bought them. But they are pretty indispensable. They're really, really effective for doing this. I have a smaller radius than I do on the bottom, just for aesthetic purposes. We're going to go in up there, pick that corner off. Now we have the kind of shape that the wallet is going to be there. And now we can actually trace some lines and punch some holes. This will make more sense as I do it, I promise, but we're just going to get to it. I want to be careful you're tracing these lines, because wing dividers always have a tendency, at least I find they always have a tendency, to jump. And it's very, very difficult to remove or hide a line scribed in Botero. Once it's there, it's pretty much going to stay there. You want to take great care to ensure that you are that your hands are steady, that you're not shaking, and that you're not going to jump over the line and leave a scrape right in the center of it. The floating red inner panel causes a step up when gluing it to the outside panel. If you're talking about that step right there, it does cause a small one, but try to get a clean shot of it there. It does cause a small step, but I find it negligible. It does not really, even though it's there, it doesn't really bother me that much. If you ran it all the way to the bottom, you would of course not have that. I make that sacrifice there for aesthetics and also for ease of assembly. I find it's having that thinner section on the bottom there is, again, just easier to stitch through, easier to punch through. That's kind of just a cost I choose to accept, if that makes any sense. Now, I'm assuming that's what you were asking about. Now, I've already punched a couple holes here, and I punched these holes when I was actually doing the top here, because like I always say when I'm working around card slots, the most important thing to take note of is to make sure that you're not piercing the top edge of those slots there. So I do these first. I always establish these holes as guidelines, and everything else is framed around. So these holes get punched first, and that establishes the distance for where these need to go. Then I, of course, stitch across the top there, and I stop just short of it. But that does leave me with these holes already punched from when I was doing that top stitch line. We're going to just go ahead and continue that down. Getting back and looking at that. Make sure it's straight. There were a couple folks in the Discord who had just picked up leatherwork and were kind of new to it, and were trying to figure out how to improve the straightness of their stitch lines. And what I always tell people with that is, when you want to get something straight, you need to get down at a sharp angle to it. You'll look at it there. When you get down lower, you can see it much more clearly than when you're up high on it. That's an old trick from pinstriping. You get your head down close to the surface, you can very, very easily see any at all little deviations or high or low spots in the line. Work our way down around the corner. Now, when I get to the corner, I'm actually going to stop. I'm not going to finish there. I'm going to start here, because again, like I said, we don't want to pierce this edge here. We want to make sure that this is a nice clean double stitch over the top of that edge. So I'm actually going to stop right there. I'm going to come over to the other side and start again down here, making sure that the tines are straddling over top that edge there. We're going to meet in the middle. I'm going to meet in the middle at that corner. Now, why are we going to meet at the corner? You know, we could have just as easily gone around the corner and, you know, met here in the center. It's easier if we have to fudge the distance, if we have to make a longer or shorter stitch to join these two lines. It is easier to hide that in a corner than it is in the middle of a straight line. If you know you're going to have to join two lines together and you know there's a possibility that you may have to fudge something, try to do it on a corner because you have a little more leeway. It just looks better. A teeny tiny little stitch here on a straight line looks much more noticeable than it would be here on this corner. You can get away with it. Hopefully we don't have to fudge anything, but if we do, we've taken that into account. Switch over to the two tine. I will have to do it just a little bit, but you'll see. And one more. You'll see we've got kind of an awkward gap there. I'm going to fill that, the single hole with the awl. There. So again, even though that stitch is going to be a little bit shorter than those around it, being on the corner, you just won't see it as much. Hello, hold on. Hi. Did you come to say hello? Hi. Hi, beauty. Hello. Good morning. Or good afternoon, rather. You gonna be a good cat? Are you gonna be a good cat or a bad cat? Are you going to be a helper cat or a hindrance cat? Which one will you be today? Only you can choose. You have to look inside yourself and determine which cat you want to be. No. I'll put you in the chair. You're going to be good? All right, come here. Big boy. Oh, you're going to be a hindrance cat. That's what you're going to be. All right. Everybody say goodbye. So bad. You're such a bad cat. Okay, alright, hey. Okay. Well, I always give them the benefit of the doubt. We've got half that done. We're going to go ahead and do the other half. Yeah, Redwinners, you called it. So again, we're going to work down to the corner. And once we get to the corner, we're going to come in from the other end. Working with red Botero is always kind of nerve-wracking. The colors of Botero determine quite a lot about how they work and how they feel. You notice that the black Botero, if you've worked with it before, it tends to have a more finished appearance. Seems like they do a little more finishing on the surface, whereas the red Botero, and in particular like whiskey Botero and some of the browns, have much, much less finishing on them, so you get much more of a natural kind of aniline texture to it. And the consequence of that is it's very easy to scuff, or worse, to stain if it gets any moisture or things like that. You have to be very, very careful. I find the red is one of the most susceptible to that. People always talk about, the whiskey is rough to work with. I'm always more nervous working with the red than anything else. Whiskey I'm pretty used to. It may just be a matter of me having worked with it so much. Whiskey is one of my favorite colors to go with, and I always recommend that if you're looking for a color, if you had to pick one color to stock in your inventory, I would say Whiskey Botero. Because it's just one of those colors that simply accents just about everything. It works with almost any color that you could possibly want to use. Here, so almost to the turnaround. Again, we've reached our corner. Let's see how well these. This one here, I shouldn't need to fudge anything, actually. I can just make it work. The two-prong tine should fit just about perfectly in between those start and stop points right there. We've gone ahead. We've punched our holes. We're going to go ahead and join these together now. And I do these by halves. Show you what I mean. Scratch all out first. Before we do anything, we need to scuff the back sides to make sure that these are going to adhere. Now, on the bottom of this here, where it's just flesh, down where you won't really see it in the very bottom of the wallet, we don't need to do anything special with that. We really only need to scuff this finish side here. Just taking the scratch all, working up to our holes here. That surface nice and roughed up there. Do the other side while we're back here. And in light of Ben's question, I think I'm going to... Where did I put my knife? There it is. I think I'm going to skive just the corner of this real quick. Try to see if I can get that into a spot where I can show you. But I generally just use my knife for this. I don't bother using the skiving knife. Just taking a wee bit off the corner there. You can see that there, just to kind of feather that edge a little bit nicer. Okay. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to line these up in the way they're going to attach. I need to scuff the inside of this edge to make sure that it's going to adhere. I'm going to line those up just by eye. Take my awl and mark on the bottom of that where the bottom of that card slot ends, so I know where to stop scuffing. I'm going to go around about 1/8 of an inch. And again, these have already been laid alongside each other, measured and trimmed, so these two here are pretty much as close in size as they're going to get. And that's one of the reasons I choose to do this method, which I'll explain as I get into it. You'll see when we do the other half kind of why I like to do it this way. Scuffed here. Now looking at this, you could say, well, why don't you just you already know where your stitch lines start and end. Why don't you just take these while they're separate and punch holes on them, rather than trying to glue them together and doing it that way. And I've done that before, and it assumes, sometimes correct, sometimes erroneously, that you have these exactly the same size. And you may be surprised to find that that's more difficult of a task than you would think. Even with templates and rulers and measuring and all that stuff, sometimes after gluing, after stitching, after doing all the various lead-up steps that get you to this point where we started the stream today, sometimes things change in dimension or change in shape, and you have a problem. You may come to find that if you were to say, I've measured these, they're both exactly 4 inches tall, and you punch the holes separately, you may come to find that when you put them together, one may be a degree or 2 degrees short of 90. And you suddenly find that your stitch line that you thought was going to be straight is canted on one and straight on the other. How do you rectify that? How do you fix that? And it's very difficult to do if you've already punched the holes separately. I find that by doing it this way, I kind of choose one side to be the index, and that the important side is the interior, where everything has to function, where all the cards have to go. So I choose this to basically be an index point. Everything is aligned around the dimensions of this piece, no matter what it is. So in other words, if this piece is perfectly 90 degrees square on all sides, excellent. We do the outside around that. If it is not, if it is maybe 89 or 88 degrees here, something small enough to where you wouldn't notice it by looking at it, but definitely large enough to notice if you were to put it up against another piece of leather, it also doesn't matter because, again, everything is shaped around this shape here. So punching holes individually on each piece and then trying to join them, again, to reiterate, it assumes, sometimes incorrectly, that both pieces are exactly the same. And with leather, we try to have that all the time, but we do not always. Even for somebody making as many wallets as I do, like 2 to 3 a week at this point, still, they're not always perfectly the same when you do it. Everyone is a little bit different. On some wallets, you may have watched me on the stream, I'll punch the whole thing around and never have to fudge a stitch. On this one, I had to fudge one. And they're all cut from the same template. They're all cut the same way. I don't do anything differently, but there are minor indistinguishable differences at indistinguishable points in the build that cause you to have different dimensions on these. So the fact I had to fudge a stitch here and not on this side means that there is some minor difference between these two, and maybe not in the shape of it, maybe just in the point of where I put the stitch. I don't know. In the end, it doesn't matter because, again, whatever difference there is small enough to not be visible to the naked eye. If you want to get in with a laser and measure it and try to square it off and figure out where it is, you could probably find it, but we don't have time to do that. We've got product to make. So we've gone ahead, we've got these ready, we're ready to go ahead and attach these. How do we do that? There's a good way of ensuring that we get this lined up properly. Tools out here. Couple things we need. Get my ever so fancy rainbow clamps out. You know what I've forgotten? I need to go be right back. I need to get a damp paper towel. I always keep a damp paper towel nearby whenever I'm gluing or doing edge painting, just in case you get a little bit that spills or goes somewhere you don't want to. You have something damp nearby with which to wipe it up. So give me a second. I'm just going to grab one of those. I will be right back. Okay, sorry about that. Thought I had that prepared, and it turns out I already forgot how to stream. So again, my damp paper towel, just for insurance purposes. My mom and my godmother driving by waving at me. I'm just going to go ahead. I'm using the Sewa water-based glue for this. For Botero and Veg Tan, I find that the Sewa works extremely well. For things like Chev and Saffiano and other chrome or dual tan things, I find it works less well. And I use the contact glue for that. So most of my alligator wallets and things like that are going to be using the Aquilum contact glue. But for these, almost exclusively the Sewa glue. And I prefer to use more rather than less glue. Glue is pretty inexpensive, but very critical, so I want to make sure that I have all my seams really nicely glued up. Because this is, going in a pocket, this is going to take a certain degree of abuse. I want to make sure that it has good chemical adhesion. Now, before we do this, before we stick these together, I'm going to take a needle. I'm going to use this little trick. So I'm going to run the needle through. You see where I have the stitch point. The stitch on the top starts and stops at the same point on each wallet. I'm going to take the needle, put it through my interior, drive it through the exterior to hold them there at that anchor point. So that way I have an anchor to hold it out the top here where it's very critical that these line up. Kind of shift and shimmy that a little bit. I get one of my clamps, stick it down. Now on the bottom here, turn around, I'm going to line it up there. Take another clamp. So I've got it basically at the start and end point there, and I'm going to work towards the middle here, trying to keep the edges as aligned as I can. If I have the exterior sticking out a little bit on the edge, it's okay. I can trim it. What I want to avoid is, I want to avoid my interior being larger than my exterior. I can trim the exterior quite a lot. I cannot trim my interior at all. If that makes any sense. And I realize I'm talking rather quickly as I go through this, mostly just to kind of keep myself on track. So if I'm moving through something too quickly, or I'm not quite clear about something, please do let me know. Happy to go back through it for you. Once those are joined up, we can take that needle out. Now we can kind of let this sit for a minute. The Sewa glue bonds very quickly. It does not take long at all to get a good bond. Not a full cure, but just at least a partial cure, enough to where it'll hold together. Generally 60 seconds is all it really needs. We're going to let that sit there. Catch up, have a drink of water here real quick. All right. Very terrifically exciting stuff watching the glue dry, I know. I'm thinking some more about my next stream. It seems that people liked the hand tools segment I did on my last stream, which was now 2 weeks ago, golly. I'm thinking of doing more like that, and somebody had suggested doing one about operating a small business, small business concepts and things like that. And I think that's a pretty good idea. I like the idea of doing that. I came into this with the benefit of having already, 10 years of operating, a small business and kind of learning, customer interactions, the principles of doing good business. And I truly feel for people who come into this without that experience, because it's hard. It's difficult to learn. I had kind of a safe environment to do it with, but people just kind of starting off on their own with no real idea of what it's like. It really is you're kind of going into the jungle alone, so to speak. So I think I'm going to do something along those lines. You tell me if that's something you think would be beneficial to any of you, or if you have any ideas about that. And alternatively, if there's anything else you'd like me to talk about, if there's anything you'd like to learn about, I'd love to have something that was useful and interesting to people. So please do let me know. By now, I think our glue should be set, so we can take our clamps off. Set those aside. We'll need them again soon. We have one half of the wallet done. I do these in halves. I kind of leave the other half flapping free. Just because when I'm stitching this side, I don't really want to worry about, is my glue going to hold on the other side? You're kind of always working around that, trying not to break the glue bond that you've made. So I find that just leaving it go is easier than trying to hold it in place with just glue. We'll glue it immediately before we stitch it, but there's really no need to do anything other than that. So now, we punched our holes on the inside already. We need to punch for the outside too. And the reason I've come to doing it this way, again, like I said, when you're punching them separately, you assume that both sides are exactly the same. These ones are very, very close. there's maybe only a 0.5 millimeter of difference on the shape of them. So I probably could have done it that way, but still I like doing it this way. I've made my index stitching holes on the inside. I've glued them together. Now what I can do, I get the benefit of using these holes as guide holes to drive my chisels through. So I'm going to put my chisels into these holes, but I'm actually only driving them through just the outer two pieces. I don't need to drive through a whole 1/8 of an inch. I've already driven through this whole interior section. I only need to come through this. So I get to kind of keep them relatively straight. I'm only working through a small bit of leather, and the areas that it's already gone through, it's not fighting, it's just resting in there because it's already nice, clean, fresh holes, and I can just cleanly drive them through. I could push it through by hand if I wanted to, is how easy it is. We're going to go ahead and get our chisels back out and finish this job. And just dropping it into the holes we've already made. It goes deep enough to where it'll just stay in them on its own. But still, you want to get a good look at it, make sure you're holding it upright. So we've already pretty light striking needed, but there we go. We've got a nice clean path through to the outside. Go. That's driving through really cleanly. This is what we want to see. So you could argue that this is kind of a, the argument could be made that this is less time efficient than just punching it all at once, but not a great deal of time is expended here doing this. I'm spending more time talking about it than I actually am doing it. Even though we're technically re-punching something we've already punched, it is not a great expenditure of time. But we're going to do it the same way. We're going to come back, we're going to do the other side here, and work our way towards the middle. And you want to, when you're doing it this way, when you're coming out the other side, you want to be looking at how these chisels are exiting the other side. You want to be looking, am I deviating? Am I too close to the edge? Am I too far from the edge? Because you still do have a great degree of control. Depending on how you rock these chisels in there, it will determine where they exit. So you do have quite a bit of control as to where they come out just by how you hold them. And a lot of people struggle with that. There is no magic bullet to that. You really just have to practice with it. And actually, I've got a really great shot of it there. My camera's looking directly down it. You can kind of see how I'm holding it there. Having done it so much now, I know by feel when it's upright and when it's not. I can just kind of tell. But even so, I'm still getting back, getting down and looking at it to make sure, yep, that's right. You want to look at it before you do any strikes. And that requires a great deal of discipline. Sometimes you need to slow yourself down to prevent yourself from just going too quickly. Sometimes you need to actively, take a breather and think, I need to slow down and look at what I'm doing. And you'd be surprised how much of a difference that can make. Oh, looking good. Take corner, which was just a single. These Junlin or the Leatherwork school from Alan Valentine chisels are sharp enough out of the box, and after extensive use for me to be able to just mostly drive them through by hand if I want, especially the 2-prong or the 5-prong chisels. Very good chisels for the price. So we've done that. We've got our holes punched all the way through. While these pieces are separate, this is another reason I do them in halves. While these pieces are separate, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to punch the stitch in the open center between there. Not everybody does this. I like to stitch this bottom part because of any part of the wallet, this is the part that takes the most abuse, is this fold on the bottom there. So I like to know that is stitched shut. So that even if we do, at some point in the future get some delamination from our glue, just from abuse and from flexing continuously being in a pocket, it is not going to come apart because there's still a mechanical bond there. There's still the stitch there. Go ahead and do that. I'm going to take my dividers here. good. And I'm lining up through the holes I've already punched in here. Hey, Russian. Russian, I need to buy some leather from you. Here, I'm going to mark. One thing I need to do, I should have done this before I had glued them together. But I need to know where, when these pieces are together, I need to know where on the back interior connects to it. Mark there. It may be a little difficult to tell, but I just made a quick little awl mark as to where this piece is going to be, so I know where my holes are going to have to be. And that lines up just perfectly. That makes me happy to see. Perfectly. Yes, Drew, I would. The paint holds better than just a simply burnished edge. You can think of paint, especially when it's been melted into the edge with the filetus, almost as an additional layer of glue just across the top. But for consistency's sake, I still like to make sure that that it's there, because again, that is a very, very high abrasion area. So it is conceivable that you could wear through even a painted edge at some point, depending on how they carry it. If they're carrying it back pocket in jeans, you know, you'll get a lot of wear there. So I like the extra insurance of it, and I like the consistency of having a contiguous stitch across the entire perimeter of the wallet. I think that looks better. But depending on how you do your wallets, you may think otherwise. So again, really no right or wrong way to do it. That's my thinking behind it. You can see we've punched up there. Hey Bob, thanks for the sub there. Hey Bob, it's good to see you. I'm glad you joined. Good to have you here. As you can see here, I've come across a little bit. I've gone 3 stitches into where this is going to be, but we don't need to go any further than that. When we glue these pieces together, we'll be able to repunch those, and you'll see the benefit of having a few of those in there. So we've got this far. We're basically ready to stitch this side of it here. I'm going to go ahead and take my hammer, and I'm going to hammer these holes closed a little bit, because one effect we do get from double punching them is we do start to get a lot of distortion around the upper sides of these holes here, just by virtue of, you know, the tines get thicker as they go towards the base. You're driving it deeper, and more frequently you start to open those holes up a little bit. So we want to close those just a hair so that our stitches are a little cleaner in there. So we're just going to take the hammer, go around the edge there. Hit it from the other side too. So that has closed our stitching holes up quite a bit. Now we're actually ready to stitch this half of the wallet. Get our thread ready. The general rule of thumb for thread length is 4 times the length of the perimeter is generally enough thread. Now that will vary depending on your stitches per inch, and also, more importantly, the thickness of the leather, but that generally works for me pretty well. I like to do this all in one run of thread, because I think it makes a stronger bond. You don't need to be too detailed about how you measure this. I just kind of lay it up alongside it and fold it a couple times. Or give a little bit extra, because you never know if you might blow through the thread as you're stitching it there. It's good to have. It's always better to have more thread than not enough. Let's see. Thread the needles here. I'm a little out of practice with streaming, having not done it for 2 weeks. I neglected to prepare anything to talk about while I'm stitching here, so I'm kind of winging it as we go. I'll think of something here. It'll come to me, don't worry. All right, so we're ready to go with that. If you'll bear with me for a moment, I'm gonna put the black screen on because I'm gonna rotate my camera to face me. I don't want to give anybody motion sickness as I do that, so give me just a moment. I'm gonna set up the stitching pony here. I'm gonna flip the camera over, so stand by. So, perfect. I think that'll do just fine. So again, the biggest benefit that I find to doing it this way, to only doing one side at a time, is I'm not worrying about what is happening down here with this other side. I'm not worrying about, did I break my glue? Did I pull it apart? None of that matters. It can just kind of flap freely there. Up. Thread has become caught by my clamps over here. Hold tight. Go. Perfect. I was having a conversation with Bob in chat there over the past couple of days, and we got to talking about this is the kind of conversation only I would have, but I swear it's real. It did happen. Rushton, I'm sure you'll believe me, but we got to talking about Guadalcanal, the Guadalcanal campaign in the South Pacific, and we found that we had family members who had mutual experience here to some degree to this particular place. My grandfather, like I said, he joined the Navy immediately after Pearl Harbor. He enlisted with his 4 brothers, so all 5 brothers went to the Navy. And by the time they finished their basic training, Guadalcanal had basically just ended. And very famously in the Guadalcanal campaign, I'm sure everybody's heard of them, the Sullivan brothers. There's a group of another, I believe it was 5. I know it was at least 4, but I think it was 5 brothers who had all enlisted, who had been in the Navy, and they served on the USS Juno at the Guadalcanal campaign. And tragically, all of them were killed together. They were all on the same ship. Part of their terms of service for them enlisting was that they requested that they had to serve together, and it always amazes me that the recruiter and then the Navy honored that request. They did in fact serve together. But by the time my grandfather and his brothers had come through, unfortunately, all of the Sullivan brothers had been killed already. So that was no longer something the Navy would do. So, despite all being in the same service, they were parceled out to different ships in different places and in different theaters even. So some of them went to the Atlantic, some of them went to the Pacific. I thought it was 5, Rushton, thank you. I thought it was 5 because I knew it was, I kept thinking it was the same as my grandfather. But I digress. He arrived at Guadalcanal after it had already been wrapped up. But there were still Marines on the island, so they would take them on board their ship, and for recuperation and recovery, and trade with them, which the Marines certainly liked. And it was at this time that my grandfather acquired what he referred to as an Imperial Japanese Marine battle flag. Very neat. Now there is no such service as the Imperial Japanese Marines. That was simply what he called it. And I came to find out later that what he was referring to was in fact They were called the Special Naval Landing Service. They were effectively what he said. They were Marines. They were carried on board ships for amphibious operations, and this particular detachment had been intended to land at Midway, but no landing ever occurred at Midway, so they were sent to Guadalcanal instead. And he acquired one of their flags, which is apparently quite a rare thing. There were not a lot of these guys, so it was kind of unusual to come across them in this manner. But I've always had some curiosity as to the origin of this flag. Because at the start of the Guadalcanal campaign, there was some big trouble. There was some, let's just say there were some problems with the Navy's support of the Marines on board the island there. And by that I mean the Navy abandoned them there. After losing, the Yorktown at Midway, and the Navy was still pretty under strength, it was imperative that they kind of preserve the strength of the fleet until some of these new carriers could arrive and replenish them. So they, at the report of a large Japanese surface force approaching the island, the Navy basically pulled back and left the Marines there on their own to hold out for a certain period of time, which caused no great love between the Marines and the Navy men there. But, they made up afterwards. I digress. I have read various accounts of the Marines producing fake souvenirs to sell to unsuspecting sailors, which they had no problem doing, again, because they felt betrayed by the Navy. So I've always wondered, is this flag real? In that, was it what he says it was? I know that it was certainly real enough in that it came from Guadalcanal. I simply don't know its progeny before that. Was it some clever Marine who had a lot of time on his hands, which I can't imagine how? Bob, as you said, it's questionable whether they would have had the materials and the time to produce such a duplicate. I don't know. It's a fun thought experiment, but it's regardless, it is a cherished treasure of mine. I only take it out kind of rarely. Maybe I'll get it out and show it on stream next time. But he left me a couple interesting things that I'm safekeeping. One of the interesting things he also left me, I forget where he came across this. I don't believe he picked this up at Guadalcanal. I believe this was elsewhere. He came across a prayer book. It is all in Japanese, except for the titles of the prayers, of the songs. They're all in English, which is very strange, which leads me to wonder if it was maybe something that was donated by the Red Cross for earthquake relief, things like that. Don't know. Certainly some interesting keepsakes there. Yeah, my grandfather went through, starting at Guadalcanal all the way through to the end on a destroyer escort. He only narrowly missed out Okinawa and Iwo Jima because, well, it's kind of a funny story. My grandfather was a machinist's mate, first class, and he and his friend ended up becoming so familiar with the workings of the ship that they created a special watch for them. The point that they no longer had to stand watch with the other sailors. They were kind of free to do what they needed to do. But the caveat of that was, when something broke, they worked until they fixed it. There were no breaks. They didn't sleep. They didn't take lunch. They didn't eat. They worked until the ship was repaired. He actually quite liked that because they were able to keep the ship working pretty efficiently. But the interesting thing about these destroyer escorts is they were diesel-electric boats. So not steam-powered, not steam boilers, but literally, large diesel motors that needed more or less constant maintenance. And by the time the war had wound down, they had put a fair number of miles on these poor motors, and they started needing more and more frequent maintenance. And they really needed to go back to Pearl Harbor to get a refit, but that simply wasn't going to happen with the pace of the war. In any case, they found themselves working on the motor, and there was a crack in a flue liner that they had to remove. And the cylinders on these engines are tremendous. So him and his co-worker removed the flue liner and repaired it, but they now had the part they had just removed from the motor. And to clarify, when I'm talking about this part, it's about the size of a 55-gallon drum. It is large. It's very large and very heavy. And in a very small, not exceptionally seaworthy ship. It is pitching and rolling quite a bit, even below the waterline. You're getting tossed around quite a bit, so it's quite a hazard. Fortunately for them, it's at night. Ship is on convoy duty, so it is zigging and zagging to anti-torpedo measures, and they decide that they're going to be clever. They don't really have anywhere to stow this thing. There's really nobody watching. They know all the guys are on duty, and they know a good place to go up on deck from their hatch where nobody will see them, and they decide that they're going to simply deep six the thing. Just get rid of it. It's useless. It can't be fixed. It can't be used for anything. It's only going to take up space. Let's get rid of it. So they manhandle it up, the two of them, and it is not easy going up. If you've ever been on any kind of naval vessel, you know that the hatches and accessways are not very friendly to navigate. You'll bump your head and break your knuckles on them. So carrying this up the stairs was no easy task, but they managed to do it, and they managed to do it in the dark, because once they got up to the deck, you have to maintain light discipline, so they have to shut all the lights off and make sure that nothing is going to escape into the darkness that would betray their position. So with all those difficulties, they succeed. They get up on deck, and as I mentioned, the ship is zigzagging back and forth, kind of unpredictably. So they take a breath, they wait for a moment, and when they think the ship is going to remain in a straight line, they get ready to heave it over. And at the moment they heave it over the side, the ship takes a sharp turn. It continues on its anti-torpedo path, and it turns into the direction they have tossed the flue liner. And there's a big clang, and come the morning, the ship is vibrating tremendously. It is vibrating so badly that they actually pull out of formation and halt to send a diver down to see what has happened to it. And lo and behold, they discover that somehow, through the night, the ship has struck some unknown object and it has bent a propeller blade. How could this possibly have happened? There are many rumors about it on board the ship. Maybe they struck a whale. Maybe they struck an underwater mountain. Maybe they struck a Japanese submarine that was stalking them that they didn't pick up on sonar. Rumors abound, and only 2 men on the ship really have any particular notion as to what this could have possibly been. They kept their mouths shut for many years because they were always afraid that this was going to come back to haunt them later. But with both of them having passed now, I think there's no great risk in telling the story. But it was so bad they were not able to repair it at sea, and they weren't even able to repair it at Ulithi, the big atoll fleet base. They actually had to go all the way back to Pearl Harbor on one screw to repair the ship. They could not keep up with formation any longer. So that was how my grandfather ended up missing out on some of the worst duty his ship would have possibly had throughout the war, what was referred to as the picket line at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, which is where all the little ships with anti-aircraft armament were put out in the outskirts of the fleet to protect against kamikaze attacks. They suffered quite severely from this, but it worked. They were able to interdict many of these things before they reached their final targets. And he missed out on all that. By the time they got back, he ended up at Tinian, which is where they were housing the atomic bombs. And then shortly after that, the war ended and he came home. But I've always thought that I think about that tale quite often, how differently it might have been if they had just thrown it, a minute or so sooner or later. How might things have ended up? We just don't know. I guess some things are meant to happen the way they happen. Hey, Steve, good to see you. That's right, I forgot your Pacific time over there. It's still morning for you. So I guess as far as the leatherworking goes here, I'm just making my way back almost to the end of this stitch line here. I'll show you what we got here in a second. But for anybody new just joining who listened through my war story there, what we're working on today is I've got this bifold that somebody commissioned, and I thought it would be interesting to show the joining, the wedding, if you will, of the front to the back. Kind of think of a Italian wedding soup, which is commonly confused as being a soup that is served at weddings, but is actually a mistranslation of the the marriage from the vegetables and the meat. Stitching with such a long run of thread is always kind of awkward for me, having little tiny arms. But it gets easier every stitch, so. Ooh, a brisket cook. What are you smoking it? Are you cooking it or are you smoking it? I did about 14 pounds of pulled pork in my smoker for the 4th, which is always a hit. I feel tremendously guilty accepting praise for this meal because it is literally the easiest thing in the world to cook. But everybody loves it. It's fantastic. So it's just a pure delight to eat. It's so easy to make. But I had some trouble. I've got a master-built electric smoker, one of the little refrigerator jobbies with a heating element in the bottom of it. And I've had it for about 8 years now, 9 years. Bought it for $150 when it was new. And what a tremendous deal that has been. But I finally think it has bit the dust because the heating element is not coming on anymore. So I'm not sure what's going on with that. I've got to figure that out. It might be a thermostat that went bad. I've got to tear the thing down and repair it. No more smokery for me. Thank you, Roger. Yeah, my grandfather, I had the great benefit of living next door to him. My family, like I said, my mother and my godmother drove past. That's because we all live on the same street. We have kind of a family neighborhood here, which is just delightful. And I grew up next door to him and my grandmother, so at a very early age, as soon as I was able to understand what he was telling me, he was telling me his war stories. Because he, rightly so, was very proud of his and his brother's service in the war, and he enjoyed talking about it. I credit him directly with my very keen interest in world affairs, world history, and naval history in particular. Like I said at the D-Day in Midway Street, I was the only kid in my class who knew the names of all 4 fleet carriers at Midway. For what that was worth to me then and now, I don't know, but I like it. Going back a little bit, I've had trouble reading over the past couple years. There was a point where, when I had less responsibility at the shop and things were kind of slow, I had the great luxury of sitting around and just reading almost continuously until customers showed up. I got a lot of reading done over those 8 or 9 years, and then I took on more and more until the point finally where I had to do real work at last, and I was not able to read as much. And I would come home, and I would have to do this as well, which as much as I love this, it is still work. I'd be very tired by the time I finished up both of them, and I didn't have the opportunity, or worse, the motivation to do as much reading as I wanted to. So I've been, with this new life of mine, I've been trying to return to that because reading is one of the greatest joys in life for me. And I picked up a book on the Napoleonic Wars and how they affected the whole world in particular. Not so much a focus on Bonaparte himself and his exploits, but rather how these exploits had ramifications on far-flung reaches of the world. It's fascinating to think of a true world war at this time. Even before that, but going back with the French Indian War and that thing, how much our world history has been shaped by the events from so long ago. It is just remarkable. Again, being a keen naval history nerd, I've always been fascinated by Nelson and the great British naval victories of this time, and just a remarkable thing to read about. I guess I'll turn it over to you guys this one. Anybody reading anything good at the moment? Any good book recommendations currently? Lay it on me. I'm always looking for it. So now so you can see I've gone through the fold there. I'm going to stop just shy of this line here. We're going to come back to the bench, and we're going to glue down the other side, punch the other holes, and then we'll put an anchor stitch right here just to hold this in place. Because it is going to be under a tremendous amount of tension now. This one here, when we did the first side, it's flat. There's nothing holding any weight or any tension on it at all. But when we do this other side, it is on a curve because, again, as I'm sure you know from making these, the exterior is longer than the interior. That naturally puts it on about a 90-degree curve, and it has to fight and resist that tension. And the greatest point of tension is right here. So the reason I punched those extra stitches into this point here is to have a few holes already made where I can put some anchor stitches in there and relieve some of the tension from that glue so it can hold easier. That was a mouthful. It'll make more sense as I do it. Just hold tight. Yeah. One more here. And I think it's perfect. It's been about an hour. What I'm going to do, I'm going to flip the camera over, so we're going to go back to the black be right back screen. I'm going to flip the camera over. I'm going to hit the head and get a cup of mint tea. So let's take 5. We'll come back to this and we'll pick up the other side here. You can see here we've gone ahead. We've done half of this here. Let me handle on where the camera is here. So we've done half of this here. We're about ready to do the other half. I will see you in I'll see you in 5 minutes here. So come on back. Okay, we're back. Apologies for that little interlude there. Bob, you're in line with what I was thinking. I'm wondering if I don't know if it's the element itself or not, because I don't really know much about how these machines are put together, but I know that my readout on the top works. I know that I'm getting temperature sensor inside the machine. I really just need to crack it open and do exactly what you said. Go in with a continuity tester and see what's what. But I figured it was going to be something simple like that, either the element itself or a thermostat or maybe just a relay or something like that. So I fully expect to be able to go in and repair it. But what a fantastic machine it is for making just a damn fine meal for very little cost. Again, like pork butt, I got them at Aldi. I think I spent maybe $30 for two of them. And that was 14 pounds of meat. It ends up, once it cooks down, it ends up being like 9 or 10. But that's a lot of food to feed people with for very, very low cost and delicious to boot. So much the better. All right. So where in God's name were we? Okay. So we have stitched half of this now. So we have this half just kind of floating here. We now have to go about getting these glued down, hole punched, and stitched. First, a cup of mint tea. Very good. Okay. Nothing like a cup of mint tea. Knowing where this is going to line up now, I'm going to take my awl. Again, I'm going to scuff the inside here for our glue bond. I swear, no matter how many times I do this, the back of my mind is always paranoid that I'm scuffing the wrong side. It's only happened once, but that's all it takes. A screw up of that magnitude, not one that you forget soon. Okay. We already scuffed the back side of that, so we're ready to go with that. And we're basically going to do a repeat of what we did before. We're going to take a needle, stick it through that edge there to join it, anchor it to that one there so they match their respective points. But we're also going to do the same down here, because remember, we have a couple free holes down here that correspond with some of these. So we're also going to have a needle down here. And using the two of those, we can kind of leverage them to work against the tension from this side and hold them in place until our glue can set, until we can get an anchor stitch in there to hold it. So I've never actually described that verbally before. It's a little strange, but I'll show you what we mean. I could use the two stitches or the two needles that I have, attached to our thread here, but it's just a little awkward, so grab two new ones. Ugh. Let's go ahead, let's get some glue down. You know what, before we do that, hold up. Let's put our needles in first. That way, we're maximizing the amount of time we have to get the glue in place. Again, you'll notice, which I'm sure my wonderful colleagues are taking note, I use a lot of glue there. And this, at the start, works against me because the trouble with using a lot of glue is that it takes longer to cure. You're fighting it a little bit more, but this is definitely a place where I want to know, oh yeah, it's bonded. So I use as much glue as I can put in that spot. Same up here. I go heavy with the glue on this. Okay. We're ready to go. Let's see what happens. I know what's going to happen, but I like saying we'll see what happens here. Good. Up. So again, I'm taking this needle, putting it through the corresponding hole on the outside, and I'm lining it up to make sure that the outside edge and the top are aligned. I'm going to put a clamp there just to hold it. Same thing here. Work down here, that in place. This is always a fight. And again, especially with the amount of glue I've put there, again, at the start, it kind of works against me because we get a little bit of, it's kind of sliding around. It doesn't really want to stay in one spot just yet. There is no, this is an inelegant way of doing this, but I find that the results are more consistent for me. This can come more. Got that, it kind of held it in place. We're going to kind of working back and forth, fighting the tension, trying to get it clamped down as much as we can. And at some point, you start to get enough clamps on there to where you're not fighting the tension anymore. You're just working to align it before that glue completely sets. That's another reason why I like to use the Sewa glue on this. You have a long work time. It doesn't bond instantly. I think that's going to answer. Try to get as many on there as we can. So we've got our clamps on there. I'm going to remove this needle. I'm going to start, as this is curing, I'm going to start working towards it. So now I'm actually going to get the first stitch that goes through both pieces here. So this is immediately going to take a lot of the tension off of these clamps. It'll fight the lateral tension, hold it in place. Just that one stitch there means we can start easing off this a little bit. Because with that stitch there, it's not gonna slide off in that direction. This stitch is gonna hold it in place. Kind of a little awkward doing it this way while the ball is on the bench rather than in the stitching pony, but we're just sitting here letting the glue cure. No great rush on our part yet. There we go. That's really secured now. Actually, by this point, that is enough to where, with just that one stitch in, that is enough for it to hold its shape there. Again, like I was talking about earlier, why I don't do these independently, you'll notice that got a really good line here. We're aligned on the corner there. But even so, if you look there, you can see there's still about 1 millimeter of difference. And that's actually the exterior being slightly off square compared to the interior. The interior could be the one that's off square. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. Everything is done in relation to this interior here. So that kind of lets me put these all together. I can trim the exterior as much as I need. 1 millimeter here and there is not going to make any difference at all. But if I had done them to where this stitch hole lined up, this stitch hole lined up, but these two didn't here, that would be somewhat awkward. And then we'd have a big gap there to try to fill somehow, which would cause us to be making a very narrow distance from a stitch to edge on the outside there. So it just I find that it causes more problems than it solves. As awkward as it is to do this, once I get through this, I know that everything is going to line up once I trim it, and have a nice consistent edge all around there. Does that make sense? Did I explain that adequately? I probably did not. If I didn't, submit a complaint to my complaint department. Everybody direct message Rushton. He'll answer any questions for you. put our spare needles away here. I'm going to hold for just a second and sip my tea and let this glue cure a little bit more. Because again, unlike this side, unlike the first side, this is still under some tension, even though the thread is taking most of it. So I really want to make sure that that glue is nicely cured. When I start punching through it and pulling the chisels out, we're going to put a lot of back and forth tension on that will loosen the glue if it is not cured yet. You don't want that. Probably still happen a little bit, it almost always does, but less is better. My father-in-law is texting me pictures of the fish he got. Let me take a look at that. Pardon me real quick. Let's see what he caught. Maybe I can show it here. Good fish. 7-pound catfish. We are blessed here in Northeast Ohio to have no fewer than 5 freshwater lakes around here. Most of them are available for fishing. It is a true delight. If the complaint department wishes to submit a complaint, it cannot be done. I'm grieved to tell you. Simply can't happen. I'm so sorry. So that glue is pretty much set now. We can go ahead, and again, like we did on the other side, we're going to punch through our holes we've done already and do the outside now. That is correct, Reveners. That is the intent of it. I'd rather fight this a little bit more and have it a more assured chance of success than operate on the hope that I've measured it perfectly. Because oftentimes, like I said, when doing this, measurements can surprise you. Leather is an organic material. It is imperfect by nature, and trying to make it truly perfect dimensionally and geometrically can be quite difficult. Especially when you're doing things like punching holes in it and directly distorting the shape of it. All of that affects it in minute ways that you may not be aware of at the time. Or your cheap Harbor Freight T-square may not be actually square. Who knows? Hard to say. But going back through the holes we've already done. Again, taking a moment, in alignment. Yep, that's straight up and down. I like the look of that. Have it through, and that takes very little effort compared to what it would be if we just glued them together and drove through all together. So again, I guess to clarify, I've clarified why I don't do them separately. I don't, because I could just as well glue them together and then punch the holes. But I find that, again, like I said, when you're trying to punch through that whole edge, you have a lot more risk of having a variance on the back side than just having these holes to guide you and only having to punch through 2 layers rather than 6 layers of leather. So that's the reason I do it this way. I glue it and then I punch it, or rather repunch it. I find this method works very well for me. But if what you're doing works well for you, then that is also excellent. I'll show you the back side of this and you'll see what I'm talking about with the difference in distance from the edge. Eyeball to, I gotta do the bottom here. I want to make sure there. Oh. Now you'll remember on this side, I had to fudge this hole a little bit. These two are done with the chisel, But this little fella here is done with the awl because it just wasn't the right spacing. And again, that further reinforces what I was saying about minute variances in shape, dimension, that all combine to matter quite a bit, but are kind of difficult to measure during the time of. You don't really know how these are going to go together until you've got them glued down. To trim this bottom edge, when I did it, I laid these all together, lined them up and everything, and they looked pretty good. But when I glue it together, that's what you get. You kind of account for that as you make a bunch of them and learn. So like I was saying, you can see here, number one, you can see the back edge. It's flush at the top, it's flush on the bottom, meaning that those are lined up properly, but it's long down here in the corner. You can see where it's sticking out there. We've got a little bit, you can see how it kind of grows down at the bottom there. All of that will be trimmed away just perfectly fine. But if I had punched those holes already, assuming they were going to line up on the inside, they would not have. I would have been stuck. So I give myself the option to fix any problems that may show up by doing it this way. I hope that makes sense to you, and I hope that is beneficial to you. Because I know that doing these, I was intimidated by doing bifolds when I first started out. I tried to avoid it because it's awkward. They're awkward to put together. They're awkward to design. There's a lot going on there that you really don't think of until you try making one. You learn very quickly, wow, there's a lot more going on here than I thought there was. And it took me probably a good, 5 or 6 of them to even really get one where I started to feel, okay, I kind of know how these are going together, and I kind of am seeing where the pitfalls are. But even now, up until last year, I'm still revising it, and I'm probably going to revise it again this year. I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet. But with that said, let's get back to it. We're going to go ahead and hammer our holes closed, because again, driving it through twice, you do open them up a little bit more than you would otherwise. And black Patero is really just a pretty, what a beautiful finish on that. What a marvelous material Patero is. We're gonna go ahead and get back to stitching it here. I'm gonna flip the camera over again. So again, pardon the black screen. Don't want to make anybody sick while I do this. Hold tight. We'll be right back. Okay. Oh. 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 Boy. Oh boy. Tilt that down a little bit. There we go. As is my custom, stitching is not particularly thrilling, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about Guadalcanal. I'm sure everybody's thrilled about. But it's one of my favorite campaigns. I find these early war, Pacific War campaigns to be so interesting because really everything is kind of on the line for both parties. After Midway, the whole dynamic changes to where the Japanese are kind of desperate. The Americans are always desperate up until basically the end of Guadalcanal, when they start to get some of their, badly needed reinforcements. Some of the fast battleships get commissioned and sent out. Some of the fleet carriers begin to filter in, and things are a lot less desperate than they were just a few months earlier. But even still, at Guadalcanal, it's a near-run thing. We come out of Midway thinking, oh man, we've really given them what for at this point. The war will be over by Christmas. Just something that is often said in the 1940s. Not so. The Japanese are still very, very dangerous, very capable with what they have left. Losing 4 fleet carriers cripples them, but it does not break them. We still have to tangle with their surface forces, which also happens here. Mike, I hope so. And if you have any questions, or trouble with it, feel free to holler at me. I'll do what I can for you. Again, if I was unclear about anything or you have any questions about how I've done this, please do ask. I'm just kind of expounding as I go there, so let me know if anything was unclear. But as far as the Japanese surface forces go, we really learned during the battles of Guadalcanal how good they are at night fighting. This is kind of under appreciated, I think, even today, how tremendous the Japanese had become at night fighting, how much time they had devoted to this otherwise almost forgotten, time of war. People generally didn't want to engage at night. It was just too difficult. They would break off, but the Japanese embraced it as a time when they could really make good use of their excellent torpedoes, their excellent gunners, and their searchlight discipline is really what set them apart from everybody else. While others would just kind of turn their flashlight on and wandered around blindly, the Japanese had great discipline over how they used it, and they were able to really, really bloody our nose some of the opening battles of this particular campaign. But something important changes at the second naval battle of Guadalcanal. Hang on. Does it make a huge difference when stitching if you hammer the holes down after punching them versus doing it after you stitched? I wouldn't say it makes a huge difference, but I think it does make some. And where I find it does make a huge difference is especially if you're working on thinner leathers, where traditionally you have difficulty getting the saddle stitch to remain slanted on both sides. I find having those holes tightened already makes it easier to hold the stitch in place. If you notice when you're working on very thin parts, in particular I would say this section between the two card slot banks, you notice that the thread kind of wants to slide out of place. It doesn't want to stay where you put it. And that's how you end up with kind of sloppy looking, less than ideal stitches. I came to find that hammering it before really helps a lot in that particular case. In the areas where it's thicker and you've got all that room for it to kind of naturally lay properly, it doesn't make that big of a difference, but I do find it makes a little bit. I couldn't exactly quantify for you how it does, I just feel that it does. And for how little effort it takes doing it before versus after stitching, I find that it's beneficial to do it before, but also after. I think you definitely get more noticeable results hammering after you stitch. So definitely still do it. One is not supplanting the other. They're benefiting each other, I find, if that makes sense. So if you're not doing it, try it out and see what you think. It costs very little effort and time to do that. And I do think it makes some difference. I really, really do. At the second battle of Guadalcanal, I got to work on my transitions here. But the second battle of Guadalcanal, the dynamic changes a little bit. We've got some of the Japanese fast battleships, the Congo class. I think it's Hiei and Kirishima are coming down, and the Japanese have had a nightly tradition of bombarding the Marines on Guadalcanal up close and personal with battleship guns. And this is a problem. This is a big deal. The Marines are dying to this, and they're very unhappy that the Navy is not stopping this. So finally, the Navy gets reinforced to the point where we were able to say we're gonna try and intercept this. We're not gonna let this happen anymore. And at their disposal, they have two brand new fast battleships, the USS Washington and USS South Dakota. And these ships, these are bad dudes. These are very, very powerful battleships. By this time, the Congo class ships, they were built in the 1910s, the 1920s, so they were relatively old, but still very dangerous. And again, the crews are exceptional, so they have the night fighting down to a T. And they've been using this every time we attempt to intercept them. They've been really, continuously bloodying our noses, showing that they're better at this somewhat arcane form of warfare than we are. But at the second battle of Guadalcanal is when everything changes, and I like this particular battle because to me, it's the epitome of the right man in the right place at the right time and with the right equipment. And that man is Willis Lee, Rear Admiral Willis Lee. He is in command of the task force and in command of USS Washington. And he is going to go out and they're going to intercept Kirishima and Hiei and their accompanying smaller vessels as they come down to run supplies through to the Japanese garrison and also bombard Henderson Field. They managed to spot the ships coming down, and they put themselves in a position to intercept them. And right at the start of the battle, right when things are about to kick off, South Dakota has a catastrophic power loss and is absolutely dead in the water. So immediately, the U.S. battleship strength is down by half. With their most modern, most powerful warship is just sitting there dead in the water, no power. And again, this is at night. How then do you plan to react to this? How do you fight against an opponent that has practiced this particular form of warfare so extensively for 20-some years, and you've lost half your strength? Well, it happens that Willis Lee is the preeminent scholarly source on the use of radar, and in particular, use of radar for range finding. And it so happens that USS Washington is one of the first vessels to really be adequately equipped for radar range finding. Not just simply having a radar rangefinder, but having the fire direction needed to actively make use of that. There's a great difference, as you know, between having a tool and knowing how to use it, and also being equipped to make best use of that. And it so happens that Willis Lee is the man who literally wrote the book on how to use radar for range finding in a battleship engagement. And before the Japanese even really realize that there are two battleships out there, suddenly they begin taking very accurate battleship, 16-inch gunfire. And the long and short of it is, this is the moment when night fighting in the Japanese way, between using searchlights and keeping your eyes clear from light and being able to peer into the darkness and see, is immediately rendered obsolete. It is at this moment where none of it matters anymore. We can put every single ship in the Navy with one of these radar devices on there and see into the darkness as far as we need to and hit you. And they demonstrate that to great effect. It ends up being that I believe both Hiei and Kirishima are taken out in this one. I think somebody have to fact check me on that. But I know one of them is lost directly to the battleship gunfire, and one of them is left drifting afloat, and they take it out with torpedo bombers in the morning. But tactical and strategic victory for the Americans. The Japanese do not reinforce the garrison at Guadalcanal. They do not shell Henderson Field, and the Marines are able to have a good night's sleep for the first time in weeks. And that makes a big difference. Guadalcanal was important because coming right off the heels of Midway, the Japanese really did not expect the Americans to take to the offensive so quickly. That's exactly what Guadalcanal was. We were done playing defensively. We were done reacting to the Japanese. It was time to make them react to something we did. And it worked tremendously. And even though the war would go on for another 3 years at that point, it is the point where the Japanese kind of reach their high water mark. They're never the same threat that they were after this. We kind of figured them out. We had adapted to them, and they were unable to adapt to us in the same capacity. And it would be 3 more years of hell before it ended. But you can kind of tie it to that pivotal engagement there. At least I think that's my hot take on it as an amateur historian there. Think of that what you will. What are your thoughts on the Second Naval Battle of Guadalcanal? Let me know. This is not how I thought this stream was going to go, but what the hell, here we are. I hope you enjoyed it. We're almost done stitching this. Then I'll get to show you some edge finishing. I did a stream a couple weeks ago talking just about burnishing. You get to see a little bit of that here. And in my last stream where I talked about the hand tools, I talked about the difference between using the hand plane versus the sanding block. You'll get to see some of that here too. Because even though I am going to trim this, that long edge I had with my knife, I'm still going to go over it with my my edge planer. As you'll recall that I used a lot of glue. And when I'm gluing these things, I want to see the glue seeping out of the edge there. I want to make sure that I have glue fully through there and it is bonding securely. And in using so much of it, you get some that comes out of the edge, and the planer is a great way of taking that down. Much, much quicker than the sanding block and more accurate than trying to do it with a knife. I'll get to show you a little bit of that as well. Cover quite a few things with this topic here today. What a fetching color combination. Very happy with how this one is turning out so far. But there's still time to screw it up, so we got to stay sharp. See one spot where I want to work a little bit more glue in there. Teeny tiny little bit lifting on that. With burnished wallets, you have to be very militant about your glue. With a wallet that's going to get edge painted, like I said earlier, it effectively acts as a second layer of glue. You are denied that when you burnish the edges. So you have to make sure that every layer is fully bonded, fully glued, or you will have problems down the road, which nobody wants. Nobody wants problems. I'm actually going to start my back stitch a little early on this one. Normally I do the back stitch with just 3 holes remaining. This one I'm going to do it with 5. And I'm determining that because I want to know where the back stitch is actually going to end. I don't want it to end on a point where there's going to be tension applied with a card going in and out. So in other words, at the very top of a card slot. This one here, if I do it with 5 stitching holes, I'll be able to end it at a point where the stitch is in a secure place where it doesn't have a lot of tension being applied to it. I can feel much more secure about it staying there. So again, and I really do need to do a dedicated video for this. I'm going to do it so you can see from this is a nice contrasty one. You'll be able to see how this looks with doing just a running stitch. So again, when I do the hidden back stitch, it converts from a saddle stitch to a running stitch, and that means we go from 2 needles to 1 needle, basically almost the same way a sewing machine would operate in some degree. I'm just going to do it with just the 1 needle on the right hand, and you'll see, watch these stitching holes here, you'll see, I'm going to skip holes on that and come back and fill them in later. I'll point that out as I go, but watch. That is the one I used, and actually, Mike, I'll show you that I took mine. I used the one as, this is the one I used, the one that's on the 45 and has the blade coming out there. You just kind of draw on it with a magic marker. You can hit it with a file or a rasp and take it down and get that curved shape. I think this shape matters. I really do. So if you have the time, I would recommend you try it flat, see what you think of it. But if you find that you're getting a lot of that's biting too much or working too aggressively, try rounding it, because I think that's very critical. I think being able to have some control over how the blade interacts with the edge is very, very important, and is why the Okada plane is so much highly regarded compared to some of the flat, inexpensive ones. I think if they were just, rocking chair shaped on the bottom, I think they'd work much better. So try that out. Try it both ways and let me know what you think. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. So first stitch, coming in from the right side. You notice I skipped there. There's an open hole there. We're going to come back to that. So we're going to go around the outside there. And on this one here, this one's a little different because this is at the top of one of my card slots. So you remember when I do these, I do them with a double stitch. So I'm actually going to come back through. There's going to be 2 stitches and then a blank stitch. So there's 2 stitches. Actually 3 stitches. I'm coming in from the other side. So 3 stitches and then blank. Come around through the other end. Now we're going to pick up the other side and we're going to fill in these other holes here. Fill in that one. When I'm doing this, I am paying great attention to how I angle the needle going in. There actually is almost like 30 degrees of angle going in on the needle to ensure that it's either coming out on top or on bottom, because you have to mimic that stitch. You have to mimic that angle, and you don't have the advantage of having two different threads doing it. You have to do it purely by tension. And now that I think about it, the person who asked about me, when you asked about hammering the holes down before versus after stitching, this is another case where I think that makes a big difference. Having that little bit of extra tension at the point of the back stitch, where you've only got one thread going through it, makes a big difference with being able to hold those and keep that shape. Back over, mimicking the double stitch on that side. Gonna pull the thread back a little bit so we have a little bit loop on that end there. Pull it through with a knot like that. I'm going to glue these in place. I know some people may be skeptical of gluing the thread in, but I'll tell you what, try it and then let it cure and try pulling it apart. And you'll be surprised. You will be surprised at how well that glue holds the thread in place. I know I was. Part of the key of doing that is, snipping the ends quickly while the glue is still active, and then hammering it shut around the fresh glue. So closing it up around the fresh glue so that it has a chance to grip the leather around it makes a big, big, big difference. When I'm pushing the ends in there, when I'm pushing my trimmed ends, I'm seeing white glue come out of the stitch hole. That's good. I want to see that. Now again, while it's still fresh, while that glue is still white, still active, take it down. Go. So that closes up the stitching holes around the glue and it lets it grip the thread. I'm going to put the stitching pony away and I'm going to flip the camera around. Bear with me for just a moment. Hang on. There we go. Perfect. Here we have our stitched and assembled bifold. We're not done yet. As you can see, we've obviously got to do something with that there. But this one here is a good example for it because this is a high contrast stitch. Red against black on the outside. On the back stitch is that should give you pause. You should be thinking, oh man, I better be careful doing this, because you should. Any little mistake at all, you will see. But we did pretty damn good on that. Like I said, looking on this edge here, you can see it looks like the stitch line is curved. It is not. It is the outside edge that is betraying that. Remember, we have a little bit of excess on that bottom down there. When we trim that, that should look nice and smart again. Take a sip of tea. That was a mouthful. That was a fairly long talk about the Second Naval Battle of Guadalcanal. As per my rule, I like to police up the thread and needles as I'm done with them because of cats. Let's police up some of the things we don't need anymore. We don't need needles, we don't need scissors, don't need scratch all, don't need all. Thread can be put away. Don't need the maul. Now we only need the hammer. So we're going to go around and hammer these. you remember I talked about earlier on, and it's actually easier to see on the outside. Remember we're talking about fudging stitches and about doing it in the corner? See that little guy there? He's kind of hard to spot, actually. And he is hard to spot, again, because he's on the curve there. If it was right in the center here, maybe, you would see it. You would definitely see it there. But on the corner, it just kind of blends in, and it's not really that noticeable. So it's a good place to fudge stitching differences if you need to. You're absolutely right, Bob. The Navy certainly did do everything it could, and I feel for Fletcher having to make the decision to leave, knowing that he had to leave Americans on the beach without his support, but also at the same time understanding that if he lost the Navy, the Marines were certainly done for. If he at least left, he had a good chance of being able to come back and re-support them at a later date. But that must have been gutting to make that call. Absolutely. So I truly feel for everybody who had any part in that. It must have been incredible. Merritt Edson, the Raiders, the Edson's Ridge, just remarkable stuff. So if you haven't read much about Guadalcanal, I strongly recommend it. Another interesting thing about Guadalcanal on the Tenerife River is famous for having crocodiles. I often wonder if when I'm buying some of the Chinese alligator, which I try to avoid whenever I can, but sometimes you don't have the choice. I often wonder, could some of these possibly be coming from the Tenerife River? I wonder. I wish I knew. I truly wonder about that sometimes. But Iron Bottom Sound is indeed an apt name, and I've been very happy to see a lot of the other wrecks finally being not recovered, but at least discovered there over the past few years. Paul Allen from Microsoft, God rest his soul, did amazing work locating some of the resting places of these people. The families owe him a debt of gratitude, I think. Back to the subject at hand. You are correct, Softme. It does assist that a little bit. You lose some of that puckering because you're hammering it flat and hammering it shut as well. So I do find that there are a lot of benefits to it. Try it out, see what you think. Let me know what your thoughts are on it. With that all hammered down, all the stitches secured, everything looking nice. That sure is pretty. Let's go ahead. I know we have a little bit of trimming to do. Before I do the corners, I'm going to do this edge right here. Just going to do that with my knife, which is always a little frightening. Probably going to end up getting in the way of the camera, so forgive me. Now doing this cut, I'm not really pressing much. I'm just kind of letting gravity pull the knife into it, just letting the weight of the knife make its own cut. I'm going to come back and hit it with the planer anyway, so if we have a little bit of variation between making multiple cuts, it isn't going to matter. It's far more important to me to not slip with the knife than it is to make a truly flush cut on this point. You can see we're already starting to get through it there. Doesn't take much. So there we go. So we cut that flush. I remember we were talking about that edge there, how that looked curved before. That's perfect. If we had punched these holes before, there would be no saving that. They would always be curved, and what would end up happening was, if I trimmed that afterwards, I would be very, very close to that stitch line right there, instead of having a consistent, same distance, equidistance, the whole length of it. Where did I put? Don't need the chisels, but I do need the punches. I'm going to go in with that edge cleaned up. I'm just going to nick that one off there. Get you. Now, this one also has a little bit of extra width to it, but it's shallow enough to where I'm just going to hit it with the plane. I'm not going to bother going in with my knife to get that. Okay. And that should be it for the knife as well, so we can put that away too. Get planer sanding block. Like I said, what I was trying to convey in the last stream, talking about hand tools, this is a job for the planer. And you can actually see visible glue coming out of the edge there. The planer does a much better job of taking that down than the sanding block will. The sanding block will do it, but you'll spend more time. So why spend more time if you don't have to? I take this, and I try to do, when I'm using the plane, I try to come up from the bottom, because I don't like the idea of biting into those top edges and potentially dragging them down. Like that. How many times have I obliterated my fingers? Never. Now this is a good example of where the blade is kind of fighting me a little bit. You'll notice it's if you watch when I do it, it's a little bit staggered with the movement. It's actually biting a little bit too much. And when I feel it doing that, I do this. I rotate the blade. So I've got it basically dead on parallel with that. It bites in. I rock it back a little bit like this to shallow out that angle. That way it's interacting less aggressively with the edge. It's just kind of gliding across and doing that. These blades are so good, they don't need sharpened that much. So it's not necessarily an issue of the blade being dull. Sometimes it is. Usually it's an issue with how I'm holding the blade. Go back. We're starting to get... Now we're starting to get a consistent pull on that as it kind of... There we go. There we go. Hey, John. Good to see you. Now we're starting to get that taken down a little bit. Let's double check. Make sure we're not ruining the other side of it. Looks okay so far. Okay. I'll try and show you this. I don't know how well this is going to come in on camera. If you look right at my fingertip here, you can see a little teeny tiny bit of shine. That's a low spot. All of these dull spots are areas that have been scraped by the blade. And I think that's negligible enough to where I'm going to say that's good enough. No, the blade does not clamp. Well, this is the Okada. So this blade does not clamp in. This actually is a tension fit, which is typical Japanese style. They would over-engineer this to the point where you could just carve it out of wood and tension fit it like that. But it does work. I believe the fellow who makes these, unfortunately, just passed away. So I don't know how many more of these are going to get made. If you find one for sale, buy it. You'll spend an arm and a leg for it, but I'll tell you what, the hell of a tool. Let's try, just for the hell of it, just to say that we did, let's switch over to the Harbor Freight one. Before I do that, I am actually going to double check and make sure that it is sharpened a little bit. Like I said, these blades from the Harbor Freight ones are not good. They're very bad, but they are workable. You have to sharpen them. You have to keep an eye on them. When you first buy them, they will have burrs so large you can see them with the naked eye. So keep that in mind. It is a very budget-oriented tool, but I like showing these to show off that you don't necessarily need to use the $150 planer. You can also use the $5 planer and still do it. That should be good enough. This one does clamp the blade. A little bit different. So you can see it does have that little clamping mechanism there. This one, having not used it for a little bit, I need to kind of play with it and make sure I've got the blade. The key with these, I find, in addition to holding it properly, is that you want to have as little of the blade protruding as possible. Very, very, very minute amounts of blade showing. Got to get a little used to it because the hold on this one is very different from the Okada. But it does work. Try and show that on camera there. there. So it is a little awkward because I'm unused to using it. I generally use my Okada plane. Starting to get the hang of it there. There we go. I'm getting it now. We were able to do it with that one there. That's exactly what these are, winners. These are the Harbor Freight mini planes. I definitely need to practice more with that one if I intend to use it. I'm going to stick with the one that I know better. But I did do this side with the $5 Harbor Freight mini plane. And even though it was a little awkward, I did, in fact, still do it to my satisfaction. Bottom edge is good. So, okay, so we've gone around. It's pretty good. Pretty good. Now, these corners are too awkward to do with a plane. You could if you were very, very devoted. But this is a case where it's easier to simply go in with the sanding block. I'm going to start warming up the fileteuse here. Take a close look at it. I need to get a little bit more off that there. While the fileteuse is warming up, I'm just going to get my eye down and get a good look at the edge. Do I see any gaps? Do I see anything that's split? Do I see anything that needs shaved? That little bit at the corner there. This edge looked good. Thing lines up pretty adequately. Pretty satisfied with that. Better blend in that corner. Like it. Now I'm going to smooth this out. I'm using 320 grit on my sandpaper here. Sanding block. I'm just going to smooth this a little bit. Plane did most of the work in terms of truing up the surface and in terms of taking care of the highs and low spots. The sanding will do that a little bit as well, but it will do much more once we burnish it. This here is mostly just to smooth out any rough spots, because the next thing I'm going to do is run over this with the fileteuse to crease it. So I want it to have a smooth, reasonably smooth of an edge as I can. We're not necessarily looking to take down much of the edge. We're mostly looking actually just to kind of smooth the roughness of it a little bit. Doesn't need much, just a little bit. That looks pretty good. One other nice advantage you'll get from doing a quick sanding of this is that the slight difference of finish you get from sanding it will also help reveal any high and low spots that you have. Very similar to block sanding a car. When you block sand through the primer and see a different color primer, you're basically doing the same thing here. Just looking at the difference of the color of the leather. Darker leather generally means it has not been touched by the blade. Softer, more matte finish leather means it's either been sanded or cut with the blade. You kind of get a feel for what you're looking at as you do it. Now while I'm waiting for the fileteuse to warm up, sometimes when cutting this, you'll get a little bit of fuzziness at the edge. I'm going to take the sanding block. That removes that pretty effectively. We get a nice clean edge from that. That's nice to have when you're creasing with the fileteuse. I normally stop streaming around 2 o'clock. I think I'm going to go for a little bit more just because I'm having fun and also to kind of make up for the fact that I was gone for 2 weeks. So I hope you stick around and continue along here. And again, as always, please do ask questions. And if you haven't yet, please do like the video. It does help me get, at least I think it helps me get placed higher in the search algorithm. I have no idea. I don't know how it works. They put out all these videos saying, oh, this is how it works. Do this, do that. And even growing up with the stuff, I still don't quite make heads or tails of it. But I guess like the video if you can. And if you feel so inclined, the super thanks button, throw me a buck or two. It's always appreciated. I've still got the new Bell Skyver camera fund going. Corner there. All right. We're just about ready to crease it. I'm going to try to clean up some of this up. So you can see all this stuff here is all stuff that the planers took off. That little pile there. And it doesn't look like much, but when you go to burnish it, you'll really see where all the bodies are buried. That's where, when you put a shine on it, and you have the high spots that are shiny and the low spots that are not, you will see every little imperfection that you left behind. So trying to get, usually the more of that I see, the happier I am, because I know I'm going to end up with a smoother, truer edge when I go to do the first burnishing pass. Usually indicates less work. Sometimes, very rarely, it means I did a perfectly smooth and true edge, but more often than not, it means I got it down to where it needs to be through the hard way. Now we can go ahead and crease this. One thing I'm going to do, I have a piece of scrap red here. Red you have to be very, very careful with. I was talking about the more aniline finished Botero colors. Red is one of them. And it burns very easily. These colors generally do. Black is very forgiving. Black is hard to burn. And even if it does burn, you can usually mask it to some degree. If you burn the red, you will see it forever. So actually, I think I'm going to turn my fileteuse down a hair. And before I touch it to the wallet, I'm going to try it on a test piece here. Looks good. Not only does testing it allow us to see if the crease is looking good, if it's running too hot or too cool, in the event that it has accumulated a bit of extra temperature from sitting idle, it will bleed some of that off into a piece of scrap rather than bleeding it off into your finished wallet. Because we are almost done now, so we have to kind of take great care to ensure that we don't do a dumb thing right now. I see a little bit of glue that got stuck there. I want to get that away before I melt it in. Taking, again, my ever-present damp paper towel. I've got a toothbrush here I used to brush away some of that. As my good friend and colleague, Rushton Leather, said, leather loves to be brushed. You can't brush it enough. And he's right. I'm working gently. I'm opting to use gentle pressure and low heat with the side effect of more passes to get a slow buildup of a crease inside this. Rather than use a lot of heat and try to do it in one pass and risk burning it, I'm going to use less heat, less pressure, and just go around it more, which has its own risk. You know, the more times you're using it, the more risk there is of slipping, but I'm going to try to be careful. There's a crease on this side compared to this side, and this side looks just a little bit naked without it. The crease really does a lot to dress that up. And you'll also find that if your stitch line is a little bit wavy here and there, adding a crease, surprisingly, you would, this is the opposite of what you would think. Putting the crease alongside it actually can help make the stitch line look straighter. by being next to a straight line. You would think it would work opposite. You'd think you'd have the reference of the straight versus the not straight to put emphasis on the not straight part of it, but it works in the opposite. So if you don't have a creaser and you're making small goods, I think this is probably one of the first machines anybody should buy who's looking to make small goods. John, certain leathers require more pressure and more heat, but Taro's not one of them. This spot right here is always the most dangerous spot because you've got a little bit of variance from the card slots being stacked up there. You need to be careful that you're holding it straight and you're not going to slip off. I'm going to come back and do this again because I actually have to do the outside next. And by virtue of putting pressure on the outside, it's actually going to reduce the depth of my crease on the inside. I have to kind of play against that and come back and redo it a little bit. But I pretty much knew that going in, so. Now the black is much more forgiving, but I'm still going to be very, very careful with it. Now this part here, which is not actually solid, is always a little awkward. Find that if you just pull it up close to you, get your finger up in there, you can get just enough pressure to be able to put a light crease on that part there. Hey Mom, I'm thinking of mowing grass after I'm done here. What are your thoughts on that? How do you feel about grass mowing today? Tell me your thoughts in chat. That's pretty good. We're going to go back and just do a light pass just to reset the crease on the inside. Doesn't need much, just a little bit. Perfect. We have our crease on the inside. It's a little hard to spot. If you look up at the top by my fingers, you can see the light catching it a little bit. Might be more visible. It's actually less visible on the outside, but either way, that really kind of brings us to a much more finished appearance for this. Now it's time to burnish it. Like I said, I predicted that after burnishing and creasing and stitching, we were going to end up with about 1/8 of an inch edge. And I was right. That's right about where we're at. So, beautiful. We're going to go ahead and burnish this now. We're not going to bevel the edge yet. I know some people will bevel before this part, but we're actually going to bevel later on. I'll show you why. How much of a gap do I have between the hanging middle panel and the bottom of the wallet? I usually go about 1/2 inch. 1/2 inch to 3/8 of an inch. For for no other reason than I find that that is the most aesthetically pleasing gap there. How long does a crease hold on chrome tan leather comparative to veg tan? It's hard to say. I have not seen one from any great length of time. I would imagine probably not much difference. I actually just refurbished my friend's wallet with alligator and Minerva box on the inside, and it seemed to have held up just fine with 2 years of jeans back pocket carry. So I would not expect there to be a great difference between those two. If anything, if I had to choose, I'd say probably chrome tan leather will hold better, because generally I run that with higher heat, so I'm getting a deeper, more set impression than I am with the Botero, for example. If this was another color of Botero where I could run it hotter and make a deeper impression on it, it would probably last a bit more, but I think that's probably thinking too far ahead, to be honest. So with that said, after creasing, it does change the geometry of the edge a little bit, at least this creasing tip that I use. Not all of them do, but mine does. I'm going to go over it again with the sanding block, just real quick, just to take down any little odd things that may have popped up. In this first burnishing pass, this is where we're going to see how good of a job we did. This is where we're going to see how smooth, how true this edge truly is. Not smooth, but true. There is a difference in thinking of body shop terms. I'm just using water to start with. Just using surface tension on the tip of my finger to apply it there, letting it soak in. You can see it darken the edge quite a bit. Not using a tremendous amount of pressure, but trying to build up friction. I'm going to go over it with my canvas. We got that quite dark. Now, some people would stop there and say, yep, I burnished it. I hit it with the water, hit it with the cloth, good enough. I disagree. So I'm looking down the edge of this, and I'll try to see if I can show this on the camera. What you want to look for, so right there. Watch right here when I rotate it through the light. See those little bumps right there? Those are areas where my planer chattered and left little tiny marks. When you're burnishing the edge, the way you tell how smooth it is you're looking at the shine. Think of it as looking down the side of a car and look for a dent or bumps or things like that. That's what you're doing. You want to use the shine, use the reflection to your advantage. So I look at that and I see, okay, got these rough patches here. I need to sand it some more. I'm going to let that water soak in and dry a little bit. I'm going to go around and do the other edges real quick. And when I come back to it, we'll talk about how to remove that. People think burnishing is a very simple in and out process. It is anything but. There's a good burnish requires a lot of time. A lot of prep work and a lot of time. Again, not a huge amount of pressure. More friction than pressure. Revenues, that's exactly what it is. As much as unhappy as I was doing it towards the end there, many things translate from body shop, work into this, and it surprises me to come across them so much. But in particular here, looking down, I'm going to show you on this edge here. Again, watch the shine. Watch the shine. Where there's areas of no shine, see them right there? Watch when I rotate it through. Right there, no shine. That's a low spot. We need to come back and sand that down to try to reduce that low spot. Or rather, actually, not what we're doing. We're not reducing the low spot. We are reducing the high spots to the same depth as the low spot. If that makes sense. Again, we've got these guys over here, right there. We're going to come back. We're going to use them. This is where the sanding block comes into play. And again, emphasis on low grit. I know some people go down to like 180 or 220. I prefer 320 because I think it's easier to take the sanding marks out afterwards, but no higher than that for this. 320 is about as high as I would go. Because otherwise you're not cutting, you're just polishing. We actually need to remove leather here. And it works better after a burnishing pass because you get the fibers condensed, they're a little harder, and the sanding paper bites into it a little bit better. What we're going to do is like we were block sanding a car. We're going to sand perpendicular to it. We're not going to sand with it. We're going to sand perpendicular to it because that lets us cut with the maximum amount of the sandpaper. It's a maximum efficiency of the sandpaper. We're going to go like this. Now after we've done that, we'll come across, straighten it out a little bit. We're going to go again. We're going to go with an X pattern. Let's take a look at that. Now let's add some water to it and burnish it. See what that looks like. Now you notice as you burnish, you'll need less and less water for it to go across there and do it. The first couple passes, the leather is very thirsty. It'll drink it up. But as you start to harden that surface, it'll just kind of run across the top of it and only really moisten the top. So here's our second burnishing pass, and immediately, what do you notice about that? We still have a little bit of those spots there, so we still have work to do. But just from a single one pass of sanding and one additional burnishing pass, we have a much smoother shine on this than we did before. Much, much smoother. Compare it to, I'll put them together. So on this side is just 2 passes. On this side is just the first pass, just the one. I'm going to rotate them back. Watch the shine on them. See how much more reflection of light we're getting on that left side there? That's a minimum amount of effort that we did there. But we're getting a much better result almost instantly. So if you're just doing 1 or 2 passes of burnishing and calling it a day, you're cheating yourself. It doesn't take a lot more time to do a couple more and potentially get a really, really excellent result out of it. I'm going to finish this edge. I think what I'll do, I'm going to finish burnishing just this edge, and then I'll call the stream there because I'm starting to get tired. But that way what we'll be able to do, we'll be able to have a full-on, we did the whole 9 yards edge versus a single burnishing passage, and we'll get to put them next to each other and see what that looks like. So again, like I said, we still need to do a little more on this. We can see there's a spot where we're not getting much shine, and a little bit there we can see a little bit of those bumps there. So we're going to go it again. Same thing we just did. And I'm paying extra attention to that spot where I remember it was low. And again, this is not high grit sandpaper. This is low. This is 320 grit. Watch what happens when we burnish this one. Now, right off the bat, I can always tell by the way the water soaks in how the edge is going to look. This one's going to look pretty good. I think we're going to have to do one more pass after this. But I think this is it. Oh, yeah. Take a look at this now. Watch the shine. Watch the reflection. So we're not seeing any more bumps down there anymore. Remember those bumps that were up in here? Those aren't there anymore. We had a teeny tiny little dry spot there. But it's pretty small. I think I'm just going to do it one more time. I'm going to do one more pass on that. Curve a little bit. Actually going to do... I think that should be pretty good. Let's see how that looks. Now what you'll start to notice is as you start burnishing this more and more, the water will bead on the top. It won't soak in immediately. It'll actually start to bead up. And that is telling you that you're doing the right thing. The fibers are condensing. There is less room for the moisture to penetrate, and it is just sitting on the surface. Hey, Jason, good to see you. Well, I think at that point, I'm pretty happy with how true the edge is. Let's compare them. So again, left is the one that has been worked over. The right is the one that is just a single pass. And looking at the light there, you can see one is significantly more reflective than the other. And this is a burnished edge, but that's just one pass. So again, there's a lot of steps to it, and it's important to work through it. So with the major sanding done, you feel this edge, it is a little bit mushroomed because we put moisture in there, we've applied pressure to it with the burnishing cloth. Now we're going to bevel that. And I do that now because if I would have beveled it before, I would just be trying to re-bevel something that had already been beveled and was now deformed. Whereas at this point, that bevel will be completely fresh, be completely new, and we're not really deforming it too much. We'll take the Barry King, the 00 beveler, and we don't want to take a lot off. We just want to take a little bit off. There. Bit off the outside there. That gives us a nice round edge that takes off all the mushrooming. Now, only now, are we going to step up sandpaper. I'm going to jump up to 600 grit. And what the 600 is doing, the 320 grit does all the work of actually making the edge true. The 600 grit is now going to undo the evidence that was there. The 600 grit is effectively polishing out the sanding marks that we left there. And we'll do two steps. We'll do one step to 600 and one step to 1500 where we'll do the final burnish. But for now, we're going to do one or two passes with 6 and see what it looks like. I'm starting on the 45. I want to hit the edge I just beveled to smooth it a little bit, and we're going to go across. We're not really concerned about effectively block sanding it anymore. We can follow the shape of the edge now. We don't need to go across like we did with the block. Good. We're going to add, I'm not going to sand that again yet. I'm just going to add another little bit of water to that. Go add again. I was a little stingy with my water that first time around. And again, not much pressure, but friction, speed. Now that we've actually begun really polishing the edge, now look at the shine on that. Look down the edge of that. One is much darker and shinier. And again, people are out there, sanding all day with like 1500, 2000 grit. This is 600 grit. 600 and 320. Tremendous difference between those two. And looking at that, I actually like that enough to say, I think we're going to do one more step up. We're going to go to 1500. And now one other thing that's worth noting too, people swear by tokonol, the Japanese burnishing compound. I swear by it too, but some people overuse it. They over rely on it. The other takeaway from this is done with water. At no point have I used anything other than water to burnish this. All it needs. So water is very powerful. If you were to do that edge, that's like, what was that? 4 or 5 burnishing passes. If you would have done that with tokonol, that's a lot more than you would really need if you're getting this with water. We're going to use tokonol once. So if you'd have done this all with the tokonol, you'd have used 5 times as much product as I'm going to use to do this. And you're going to see it's going to be a pretty damn nice edge. So I'm very happy with that. I could go at that again with 600, but I don't really think I need to. Looking at that light reflection, that's pretty nice. So what we're going to do, now we're going to take out the 600 sanding marks. We're going to go up a step to 1500. And when you do it with 1500, you should still see some light reflectivity. That should tell you that you're getting a good polish out of it. Now we're going to use the tokenol. This is all I need. To do that entire edge, that's all I'm going to use. No more than that. Actually, half of it is going to get wiped away and put back inside the bottle. I like to leave the tokenol kind of wet on the surface there because it works as a lubricant. And it lets me, kind of keeps me from pressing too much, and it lets me kind of build up a good, burnish just via friction. Oh yeah. There we go. So here's our actual, more or less, final burnish. It still needs to be waxed and a little bit of polish on the top there, but looking at that, looking down the edge of that. Now again, I haven't done the corner yet, so ignore the corner. We've just done the one side there. But look at how much light we're getting from that. Put them together. So even without light reflection, we can see one is a lot darker and truer to color than the other one. Look at that. Look in the reflection and see. And see the difference there. A good burnish should take a little bit of work. It's a fair bit of work, but it's not an excessive amount of time, and the payoff is worth it. People always talk about, oh man, I want those glossy, glass-looking edges. This is how you get it. This is how it's done. You have to put in some time to get them that way. Let's go ahead, get closer to finishing. Let's wax this. The wax is important because even at this point, this is layers of leather, and it is flexing ever so slightly. And even with glue and even with a burnish and everything, you're going to get some variance of that after burnishing it still. The wax will fill in those little kind of microscopic low spots and give you even more of a gloss to it. I just take, this is the Columbus Mill wax, I just take it and I run it directly over top of it. Nothing special. I have a separate cloth that I use for waxing. I have a dry cloth and what I call a wet cloth. I don't want to get the two to interact. I don't want to accidentally wax something that I then have to paint or put a surface treatment on. Oh yeah, look at that. That's pretty. I think I'm going to call it at that point. I've gone over an extra half hour from what I usually would do. But I hope that was helpful to you guys. I hope that putting the bifold together the way I do it, I hope that was something you hadn't seen before and learned from. And I'm glad I got to do a bit of burnishing too, because I'm kind of militant about that, in that I think many people do not understand it. I think that it is kind of confusing because you think that using a higher grit sandpaper would make a better shine, but that's not the case. Not without the groundwork underneath it. So I hope that went some length to explain to you how that should work and how to get those nice edges there. So I hope that's helpful to you. Again, if you enjoyed this, please take a moment, like and subscribe. Now that I'm back in action here, I feel normal again. I'm back home. I'm not traveling anymore. Should be back at it next Monday. Like I said, I'm thinking of doing a stream where I talk about business ethics and business principles and things like that. I've got kind of a couple big projects going on, so I don't know if I'm going to get to that right away, but that's what I'm thinking of. If you have any thoughts on that, please do let me know. Always love to hear from you folks. And again, thank you so much to the people who took the time out of their day a couple weeks ago to wish me better and wish me feeling better. That was very much appreciated. I'll give it a couple minutes if there are any questions left. Nobody. This is Butero, both colors. So it's a Butero from Concheria Volpier out of Italy. Wonderful, wonderful veg tan leather. Beautiful stuff. You can get it from RockyMountainLeather.com. Excellent, excellent, excellent leather. I use it for basically all my made-to-order stuff. Many people try to find replacements for it. I think that's foolish. it is the best. I think it is the best veg tan you can buy. At least for my intended purposes. So we can fight about that, but that's how I feel about it. So I'll give it another minute or so just for a couple questions here. Take a sip of water and start putting my tools away. I think I am going to cut grass. I think it's looking pretty scruffy out there. I haven't cut it in about 2 weeks, even though there's not a whole lot of grass out there. I know it's going to rain tomorrow. I should probably do it. Probably get it done. Like I said, me mowing grass means mowing 5 different yards. So it's going to take a little bit, but I should probably do it. I don't prefer one over the other. That's a great question, but I do not prefer one over the other. It is they both have their benefits and their shortcomings, but I appreciate both. Man, I'll tell you what. Talking about cars for a hot second. I live near a highway, so I see a lot of cars randomly coming up my street who are lost. But those Hyundai Palisades are pretty good-looking SUVs. I gotta give it to them. They took the SUV concept and they actually made it look pretty. The differences between Botero and Bridle, the only bridle I have experience with is going to be Wickett and Craig's bridle. Botero has a denser grain, which matters a lot for stuff like this. The other advantage that I find to Botero versus Wickett and Craig bridle is that Botero is die struck, meaning that all full thickness of it, at least at 0.8 millimeter, 2-3 ounces, it is struck through with dye. So the whole edge is all one color. When you're working with bridle, you have that top, the outer epidermis is colored, and the interior, the lower dermis, is not. It's natural finish. So you have some difficulty with that. You either have to dye those or something like that, or you just kind of embrace that that's how it looks. So I do prefer Botero for that. I like it for that. Bridle is pretty good if you're looking for a cost-effective something to get. But when you come down to usable surface, they end up kind of, and Steve from Oak and Honey Leather, credit to him for kind of figuring this one out. When you get down to usable square footage, square inches, they come out to be about the same price. Because when you get a big piece, 24 square feet of bridle, almost all of the outside edges of it are all, pinned up and stretched or just loose grain and mostly junk. You can use it for filler, and that's about it. When you get down to what you're actually paying for, you're not paying a whole lot more for Botero versus bridle. So in my opinion, given the choice, I would always choose Botero over bridle for that reason. I find it nicer to work with. There are some cases where I would disagree with that. One specific case where I would say would be natural finish leather. I don't like Botero's natural color. I think it's ugly. It's got a weird kind of yellowy, peachy color to it. I think if you're going for a natural finish leather, I think Wickett and Craig bridle is by and far superior in that regard. But for anything colored like this, I think Botero. Excellent for belts and things like that. I agree, because you get a better use of the material from that. But for wallets, I find, having used both, you'll struggle using bridle. Yeah, I think it is better in thick weights for duty stuff, for belts and things like that. For thin stuff like this, go with Botero. For alligator leather, I get that from American Tanning and Leather out of Georgia. Very occasionally, I'll also buy from Jay Hartke, who's also U.S. based, but he deals with the Hang Long skins. Those are imported from China. I prefer to use the American stuff whenever I can, for personal reasons. But when I can't find anything else, when there's a certain color that the customer just wants, I'll go to Jay. And Jay is good people. So even if I am buying a Chinese alligator, I am at least supporting an American distributor of it. So I don't feel too bad from that. But from a conservation perspective, I definitely prefer using the American stuff. Oh, thank you, Nabil. Very kind of you. That'll go towards the camera fund. Much appreciated. Very, very kind of you. I think I'm going to wrap it up there. I think that's pretty good. Any other questions? Like I said, feel free to email me, and I hope to see you all here next week. We'll find something else to do. Hopefully, something equally interesting, or maybe if we're lucky, even more interesting. So thank you very much for joining me. It's been a pleasure as always. I'm glad to see y'all. So have a good day. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you next week.